Now, you just heard a public service message from MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. It was given to our station by my next guest, and I wanted to learn a little bit more behind the message, and I think want to share and orient the listeners on where MAD is at in 2016. I think a lot of us are familiar with the acronym, but maybe we need some updates on how it is impacting the world and Kansas and Lawrence in particular. So we want to welcome Connie Henry here to KLWN. She's a member of the advisory board for MAD Kansas and a volunteer. So thank you for coming in today, Connie.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you very much for inviting us to be here. It's a privilege to come and to talk to you about a very important cause and a very important organization.
And that is MAD, which is Mothers Against Drunk Driving.
Exactly. It used to be called Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, but that was not the intent of the group. It was not to single out the drivers themselves. It was more to say, hey, we have an issue with the act of drunk driving.
Okay. Now, and you're a part of MAD Kansas.
Right.
So that's a statewide chapter of MAD?
That is a statewide chapter.
How does it break down? Like, are there city chapters, like a Lawrence chapter, Kansas City? How local does it get?
It's not. It's kind of interesting. It's a group of 10 individuals, and we come from all over the state, but we tend to be more part of the eastern part. We'd love to work toward bringing in more people, more volunteers, and we're actually going to staff a person who will take care of a little bit more of the western part. We are a grassroots organization, and we have members who are in the Johnson County area, Wyandotte County area, down in Wichita, people here in Lawrence, and some people in Topeka. So
you said you're in terms of staffing, you were looking to get more staff. Are you based somewhere? Is there like an actual headquarters or office?
There is. It's in Olathe, Kansas, and our victim services specialist, her name is Lori Marshall, and she has recently been promoted to a managerial position. She, a wonderful woman out of Burlingame, Karen Stone, is also a victim services advocate and specialist, and they've hired a third person who will come on board this month, actually. So 3 women take care of all of the victims of drunk and drugged drivers all over the state of Kansas. So they have a huge responsibility.
And we want to talk about some of those resources here while you're here to let
Right.
people know what's available. I want to get a sense of the history of MAD, though, because
Sure.
I've heard of MAD, I think, going back to when I was a child.
Right.
I know I am familiar with the organization. Can you tell us a little bit what it's about? I know
Sure.
I think it's pretty straightforward, but there are also some different aspects of it that maybe people aren't aware of.
There are some big misconceptions. The history is pretty basic. May 3rd of 1980, a 13-year-old girl was killed by a repeat drunk driver. Her name was Carrie Leitner. Her mother did not want her life to have been lived in vain. Back in the 1980s, about 21,000 people a year were killed in drunk driving crashes. And it was just something that people didn't worry about. It was a joke on late night television, I was so drunk that. And the driving aspect, the fact that this woman lost her child, she was not going to rest until she saw some justice and saw some things change. So she began Mothers Against Drunk Driving. She was the one who pushed President Reagan at the time to start a presidential commission on drunk driving.
She was in the national media a lot, if I remember right.
She was, and she spoke very fervently about we don't want this to happen anymore. And so President Reagan actually pushed through and supported the legislation that brought us the 21-year-old minimum drinking age. And that's really interesting. I am a Jayhawk. I attended the University of Kansas in the mid-'70s, and then the drinking age was 18 years old. And it's just very interesting to see how things changed. It was 1983 when that law was passed, and everybody was like, 18-year-olds, they can go to war, they can do this, they can do that. It's really important that we set and establish that as a baseline. psychologically, researchers will tell you that our brains aren't completely developed until age 25. And so, as we're working out what goes on with us physically and mentally and, in all those aspects, it's really important to realize that drinking negatively affects all the aspects of our bodies. So, this is kind of interesting. We've come a long way. In 2013, we were finally able to crack the 10,000 mark in terms of deaths, but we don't
Going down
right
from 20 I think you said 21 to 22,000.
Right.
I'm looking at this incredible graph on mad.org, madd.org, that is showing considerable downward trends.
Right.
And you said you got under the 10,000
under the
mark.
10,000 mark, and that was in 2013, I believe. And the interesting part about that is that we're not done. Our tagline is no more victims, and that is what we will aim for. We don't want anybody to suffer the ill effects of drinking and driving or drinking and drugged driving, which is also another issue.
Because as we know, even one death is going to impact so many lives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A friend of mine, he speaks for MAD, and he says that it's like throwing a stone in a pool. The ripples that come out from that particular act affect hundreds of people and change lives forever. And sadly, my family is a part of that. We are survivors of a drunk driving crash. We were not involved in the crash, but we lost loved ones. So,
and you've presented this story to the public before. You've spoken on this,
right?
And you feel comfortable sharing the story with our
Sure.
public. Please do, because
Okay.
we want to show the impact that it has
Right.
on so many lives.
We were living our lives, living the dream. My husband was working. I worked. Our oldest son, Jacob, was a senior at KU. He majored in sports management, loved KU, everything about it. His fiancée was also a KU person, and she was a senior also. And Jacob had a job in Kansas City, Kansas. He drove back and forth from the Legends outlet to his apartment, Meadowbrook. We'll give him a plug. And one fateful evening, October 10th, 2010, they were headed back to Lawrence on K32. You know, they'd made that trip 1,000 times. And unfortunately, a man coming from the other direction decided to pass a van on a dangerous curve. They were about at 214th Street. He did clear the van, but he was clearly left of center when his vehicle struck Jacob's head on, and Jacob and Stephanie both were killed. The drunk offender was also killed in the crash.
And again, this affects people that are doing the drunk driving, but as you just told, this innocent victims are taken as a result of it as well.
Exactly.
And the reason that motivates your organization and people that are affected by it to do something about it. When did you decide to become a part of MAD and say, I want this story to be heard, I want other people to be impacted by this?
I think you have to do some healing, and you never get over the death of a child. Child loss is an incredible grief. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. However, you learn to carry it. It's never going to be fixed. But as I began to turn from looking inwardly and dealing with my own grief, I began to see ways in which I could honor Jacob and Stephanie's memory and ways that I could become involved. My story with MAD is so funny in an ironic sense because I'm on the cemetery board in our town because that's where Jacob and Stephanie are buried side by side. And I had planted some peony bushes, which is so exciting, and someone ran over them. So I called the cops, and a policeman showed up, and instead of being kind of noncommittal and just kind of saying, oh, yeah, wow, crazy lady in Edwardsville Cemetery, he actually asked me about their story. And then he walked with me over to their grave, and then he told me that in his training in his life as a police officer that he was involved with MAD and that his wife was a victim services specialist. And I thought, wow, how interesting. Someone ran over these things, meant it for evil, but good came out of it. And so I contacted his wife, and that's been about a year and a half ago. And in March, I will hit my first year anniversary of actually speaking in front of groups for MAD.
And we're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, I'd like to have you talk a little bit about that, because you are telling this story to people, I think, that should hear it, that need to hear it. It's it's called a Victim Impact Panel.
It
So
is.
I'd like to learn more about that. You
Okay.
told me a little bit about that, so we will come back with that. Again, my guest is Connie Henry, a member of the advisory board for MAD Kansas. And we'll talk about contact information, resources that people can utilize, and direct people on how they can get involved too. And she's also a volunteer, and this is and also a mother against drunk driving, and the reason you just heard right there. So we've learned a little bit more of the story, and now we learn about the impact and what we can do out there. Next on 1320 KLWN, depend on it. MAD Kansas, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, a member of the advisory board, a volunteer, and one with a personal story, as you heard the story of her son Jacob and Stephanie, and it's very personal to her, and she has joined MAD here in Kansas, and is doing something about it to make sure there is no more victims. I see that on your pin there. Not a single one. The statistics are going down since MAD first created in 1982, so over a span of 33, 34 years now. The impact is there.
It is.
Of course, we want to stop it so it never happens.
Indeed.
What do you think is the biggest change over these 3 decades that has lowered some of these statistics?
Well, I would have to say that MAD's, their goals are very, very specific, and because of their specificity, they really are honing in on what causes the issues. MAD's mission is to stop drunk driving. Drunk driving crashes are 100% preventable. When I speak at victim impact panels, I never use the word accident, because what happened to Jacob and Stephanie was not an accident. A man chose to drink. A man chose to drink on top of medications. They call that a polyabuser. And he chose to get in his Subaru Impreza and drive. And he lost his own life, but he also took the life of my son and his fiancée. So stopping it in any way possible. We also want to help rid the world of drugged drivers. And that's something that's come to the forefront. And we don't just mean, oh, those people who are on heroin or, the big name drugs. It can be the people who are abusing their prescription alcohol or their prescription medications and using alcohol or not. It's kind of spooky how that works. We also support victims who have gone through these violent crimes, and we're trying to prevent underage driving. So with that 4-pronged focus, we're really trying to hit it on all levels and take care of everything.
And how do you do that? Do you do that through new laws, through harsher punishments, through outreach to just get everyone aware of the dangers and the impact, the personal impact? I would think it's a part of both, but where do you attack it? Or where do you address it?
Specifically, MAD 10 years ago began its campaign to eliminate drunk driving, and it uses some very specific things, and they are controversial. It's kind of interesting. The first one is high visibility law enforcement for sobriety checkpoints, for check lanes, and I've seen those in action.
I've passed through them, yes.
Yes.
And MAD is usually they're assisting with that, right? MAD members.
We are there as much as we can, and it's really neat to see. We attended one in Johnson County, and it does happen in after the bars are beginning to close, and they come together from all different legal jurisdictions, and they do each other's checkpoints. It takes 30 seconds or less to go through a checkpoint. They do not remove you from the car. car unless they suspect that you have been drinking, and then they put you through the legal paces to determine whether or not you have been consuming and impairing your driving. And we did see, a 30-something man, and he did not pass the tests, and they did the breathalyzer, and he had to call family to come and get him. And the look on his face, I'll never forget it, because he was so amazed that he had gotten caught. And I thought, dude, you got in the car and you had been drinking. You had a choice to make. If you're going to drink, think before you drink. Have a plan. You have to know how you're going to get home. And so, some people are like, oh, doesn't it make Mad upset when people go and, it's all over, they, put it all over their text messages and they say, oh, there's going to be a checkpoint. No, that's actually what we want. We want people to know where the checkpoints are, because then people will not drink and drive. And that's lives potentially saved.
Yeah, you're getting people off the road.
Exactly. And people aren't, knowing where they are. That doesn't bother us. We're happy with that. And they set up signs before it. They set up signs after the space where it's conducted. And it's done very quickly, very professionally. And 9 times out of 10, the drivers go through. They processed the night we observed over 450 drivers. And, it's interesting to see. And some people would say, oh, well, you're wasting money because you get so few actual convictions out of that. And it's like, no, it's the mindset. And so it's the mindset that makes a difference. Another prong of that is, with the campaign to eliminate drunk driving, is the electronic ignition interlock systems that states are very interested in using. Kansas is one of 25 in the nation who require that. And I don't understand all of the legislative law aspects of that, but I do know that it does make a difference, and it changes the lives of those who are convicted of drunk driving.
That's a piece of technology where someone would have to blow into a device.
Exactly.
And if it registers below the legal limit or show sobriety, then the car is able to start.
Right. And
that just makes a lot of sense.
Well, if you've already been
in a world of technology.
Exactly. They say that people drink while drunk 80 times before they are caught. And that just blows my mind. It is amazing to me to think, wow. And so when this device is put on their car, it's not a hardship per se, but it makes them think actively about the decisions that they're making. Mm-hmm. Actions do have consequences.
Now, what about the laws on the books? And I ask you personally, or Matt, or as an organization as Mad, are the laws strict enough? Are they not enough? Where do you think we are at on laws?
I think that we are always working toward catching some of the loopholes in the laws. We have some good laws on the books, but I think Mad would agree, that laws could be tightened up. They could be more stringent. Here's a personal example. In the state of Kansas, if you reach felony level with your DUIs, the length of your sentence is no longer than 1 year's time. You have to kill someone with your vehicle to get more than a year's jail time. Now there is an example which it's laughable because it's so pathetic. There is a man in Leavenworth County, and it was in the news in the fall. This gentleman received his 17th DUI. 17th. Wow. And all he got was a year's jail time. Obviously, in his situation, this is not working for him. And additionally, to realize that he's on a work release program and he is not spending 24/7, 365 in jail, but is allowed to work, come and go. He is jailed, but we need to tighten up